Hey, everyone. I'm Ryan. I don't know where to start because my life feels like it's been flipped upside down. A few months ago, I thought I had it all: a great career, a beautiful wife, and a best friend who felt more like a brother. Now, I'm questioning everything I thought I knew about the people closest to me. It all started on a Tuesday. Just a regular, uneventful Tuesday. I was sitting at my desk going through emails when my phone buzzed. It was Melissa, my wife. That wasn't unusual. She'd sometimes call to ask if I wanted anything for dinner or just to check in. I answered, but when I said hello a few times, there was no response. Instead, I heard muffled voices in the background. At first, I thought she accidentally butt dialed me, so I was about to hang up. But then I heard a laugh. Not just any laugh. It was Jake's. My best friend, Jake. I've known him for over a decade. He's been there through everything: college parties, job struggles, even the day I proposed to Melissa. His voice was unmistakable, and that laugh? It was the kind he used when he was feeling smug. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe they ran into each other, and she was asking him about some surprise she was planning for me or something harmless. But as I listened, something didn't sit right. Their voices were low, almost intimate, and the way Melissa giggled, it wasn't the way she laughed when we were just joking around. It felt different. I didn't want to believe it. I kept listening, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. But then I heard Melissa say something. I couldn't catch all of it, but I distinctly heard her say Jake's name, followed by, "Stop it. Someone might hear us." She laughed again, but this time it wasn't light-hearted. It was nervous. Playful. My stomach dropped. I hung up immediately. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. I sat there at my desk, staring at the wall, trying to process what I just heard. My first thought was denial. No way. This was Melissa, my wife, the woman I've loved for years. The one who always insisted on open communication and trust. And Jake? The guy who practically helped me move into my first apartment, who I've shared countless beers with after long days. But the more I replayed the call in my head, the harder it was to ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. That wasn't a casual conversation. It wasn't the kind of banter I'd overheard between them before. It felt wrong. The rest of the day was a blur. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to the call. Every time I thought about it, my stomach twisted. I thought about calling her back, asking her outright what was going on. But something stopped me. If I was wrong, I'd look like a paranoid idiot. If I was right. I didn't even know how to finish that thought. When I got home that evening, Melissa was already there. She greeted me at the door with a smile and a kiss, just like any other day. "Hey babe. How was work?" she asked, her tone so casual it made me question everything all over again. I just mumbled something about it being fine and brushed past her, heading to the kitchen to grab a beer. I couldn't even look at her. She went on about her day, telling me how she'd run errands and met up with some of the moms from her yoga class. She didn't mention Jake at all. I kept watching her out of the corner of my eye as she chopped vegetables for dinner. She looked so calm, so normal. Like nothing had happened. I kept waiting for her to slip up, to say something that would confirm my suspicions. But she didn't. The worst part was that, for a moment, I almost convinced myself it was all in my head. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the call was innocent and I'd just misinterpreted things. But then I'd hear her voice from the call again in my head, soft, flirtatious, and completely unlike the way she talked to me. I decided not to say anything that night. If I confronted her and was wrong, it would cause a rift between us. But if I was right, I wasn't ready to face that yet. I needed proof. Something solid. That night, as I lay in bed next to her, my mind wouldn't stop racing. Melissa fell asleep almost instantly, but I just stared at the ceiling, listening to her breathe. I wanted to reach over and wake her up, to demand answers right then and there. But I didn't. Instead, I started thinking about all the times I might have missed the signs. Had there been red flags I'd ignored? Times when Jake came over a little too often, or Melissa mentioned him a little too casually. I didn't sleep at all that night. And when morning came, I had a plan. I wasn't just going to sit back and wonder anymore. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. The morning after that call, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My body was exhausted from a sleepless night, but my mind was running full throttle. Melissa, on the other hand, was as cheerful as ever. She kissed me on the cheek and said she was heading out for a coffee date with the girls. I watched her walk out the door like I had 1,000 times before. But this time it felt different. I wasn't just watching my wife leave, I was watching someone I suddenly wasn't sure I knew anymore. Once she was gone, I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone, trying to figure out my next move. That's when I remembered something. Her phone. Melissa and I had always been pretty open with each other about passwords and devices. I'd never felt the need to snoop before, but now? I needed answers. I went to the little charging station in the kitchen where she usually kept her old phone. She had upgraded a couple of months ago but hadn't wiped her old one yet. When I turned it on, the screen lit up with her usual password screen. My hands shook as I punched in her passcode. It still worked. Her messages synced to her old phone, and for a second I hesitated. My stomach churned at the idea of invading her privacy, but the memory of that call pushed me forward. I scrolled through her recent texts trying to find something, anything, that would confirm or deny my suspicions. Most of her messages were innocent. Chats with her yoga group, her sister, even a few with me. But then I saw his name. Jake. At first their messages seemed harmless, just a back and forth about his fantasy football picks and a few jokes. But then I noticed a conversation from a week ago where Jake had texted her late at night. "Jake, you up? I can't stop thinking about earlier. Melissa, don't be reckless. You know the rules. Jake, you looked amazing today. I mean it. I don't know how much longer I can play it cool around Ryan. Melissa, stop. This isn't the time. I told you, not over text." My stomach turned as I read those words. Not over text. It didn't take a genius to figure out what that meant. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. I forced myself to keep scrolling, hoping I'd find something to explain it away. But instead I found more late-night messages, each one more incriminating than the last. "Jake, that dress you wore last night. I can't get it out of my head. Melissa, you have to stop saying things like that. Jake, why? You know it's true. Melissa, Jake, I'm serious. Don't text me stuff like this. Someone could see." I felt like I couldn't breathe. My chest was tight and my head was spinning. I put the phone down and walked to the sink, splashing cold water on my face. Every part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers. But the rational part of me, the part that still couldn't fully believe this was happening, decided to wait. I needed more than just a few texts. I needed proof. That's when I remembered something else. Our neighbor, Mrs. Callahan. She's this sweet older woman who's lived next door to us for years. She's the kind of neighbor who notices everything and loves to chat. A couple of weeks ago, she'd mentioned seeing Jake around the house late at night when I wasn't home. At the time I didn't think much of it. Jake's always been welcome here. But now it felt like another crack in the foundation. I grabbed my coat and walked over to Mrs. Callahan's house. She answered the door almost immediately, smiling warmly when she saw me. "Ryan. How are you, dear?" I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, Mrs. Callahan. I was wondering if I could ask you something, about Jake." Her smile faltered and her eyebrows knit together. "Jake? Is something wrong?" I hesitated, then decided to keep it vague. "Not really. I heard he's been around the house a lot lately when I wasn't home. Did you notice anything unusual?" She tilted her head, thinking for a moment. "Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but now that you mention it, I have seen him coming by a lot more often lately. Late at night, too. I figured it was just you two hanging out." I swallowed hard. "Did you see how long he stayed?" She frowned. "A couple of times I saw him leave really late. Once, I think it was close to midnight. Another time, I could have sworn I saw him leaving in the early morning. I thought maybe he crashed on your couch after drinking or something." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My head was spinning with all the possibilities, none of them good. I thanked Mrs. Callahan and made my way back to my house, my heart pounding the entire way. When I got inside, I sat down at the kitchen table and tried to piece everything together. The texts. The phone call. Jake showing up at my house late at night when I wasn't home. It all added up to one thing, but I still couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. Melissa came home later that afternoon, carrying a shopping bag and smiling like nothing was wrong. "Hey babe. I got you that coffee you like from the new place downtown," she said, setting the cup on the counter. I stared at her, wondering how she could look me in the eye so easily. How could she act like everything was fine when I had all these pieces of the puzzle sitting right in front of me? I knew I couldn't stay silent much longer. But I also knew that when I confronted her, there'd be no going back. I didn't confront Melissa right away. I wanted to, but something told me I needed more than texts and Mrs. Callahan's observations. If I went in half prepared, she'd probably find a way to twist things, make me doubt myself. So I made a decision. I was going to hire a private investigator. It felt extreme, like something out of a bad movie, but I didn't see another way. That night, after Melissa went to bed, I searched online for local PIs. By the next morning I'd made the call. The guy's name was Frank. He was older, no nonsense, and didn't ask a lot of questions. "You want answers, I get answers," he said. We met at a coffee shop 2 towns over where I gave him all the details. The phone call, the texts, the late-night visits. He nodded, jotting everything down without interrupting. "How soon can you start?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Tonight," he said. I left the meeting feeling a mix of relief and dread. Relief because I was finally taking control of the situation. Dread because I knew I might not like what he found. The first few days after hiring Frank were brutal. Every time Melissa left the house, I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for my phone to buzz with news from him. Meanwhile, Melissa was acting like everything was perfectly fine. She'd hum while cooking dinner, ask me about work, and even suggest we plan a weekend trip. If I didn't know what I knew, I might have believed everything was normal. But now every smile felt fake, every laugh felt forced. One night, as we were sitting on the couch watching TV, she got a text. I couldn't see who it was from, but the way she subtly tilted her phone away from me set off alarm bells. She typed something quickly and then placed the phone screen down on the coffee table, like she didn't want me to see it light up again. I didn't say anything, but inside I was boiling. How long had I been blind to this? How many moments like this had I ignored? Then, late on the 3rd day, I got a text from Frank. "Frank, got something. Let's meet." My heart sank. I didn't know if I was ready to hear it, but I knew I didn't have a choice. I met Frank at the same coffee shop where we'd first talked. It was late in the evening, and the place was mostly empty except for a couple of college kids with laptops and an older guy reading a newspaper. Frank was already sitting in the corner booth, a folder in front of him and a cup of black coffee in hand. "Ryan," he said, nodding as I slid into the booth. His face was unreadable, but the folder in front of him looked thick. My stomach flipped just seeing it. "Do you have something?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded again, flipping open the folder. "You said you wanted answers." "Well, I've got answers." He handed me a stack of photos. The first few were innocuous: Melissa leaving the house, getting into her car, going to a yoga class. Then he flipped to another set of photos and my blood ran cold. It was her. And Jake. The pictures weren't grainy or hard to interpret. There was no mistaking what I was looking at. In one, they were sitting in a booth at a bar, leaning close, her hand on his arm. In another, they were standing by her car, and Jake's hand was on her waist. And the last one? The one that made my chest feel like it was caving in? Jake kissing her. Right in the parking lot of that bar, like they had nothing to hide. Frank slid the photos aside, revealing a few pages of notes. "They met up twice in the past 3 days," he said. "Once at the bar, once at your house. He showed up last night around 9. Left just after midnight." My hands were trembling as I stared at the pictures. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was real. Right there in black and white was the proof I'd been dreading. Frank kept talking, explaining his process, but his words blurred together. I felt like I was underwater, struggling to process what I was seeing and hearing. "Ryan." Frank's voice cut through my haze. "You okay?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure if that was true. What do I do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's up to you," he said. "You've got the proof. You can confront her, talk to a lawyer, or both. But if you want my advice, don't go into this blind. She's going to lie. They always do." I sat there for a long time after Frank left, staring at the photos. The woman in them looked like Melissa, but she felt like a stranger. The way she smiled at Jake, the way she leaned into him, it was like I was seeing a side of her I'd never known. When I finally got home, Melissa was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine. She looked up and smiled. "Hey babe. You were out late. Everything okay?" I stood there in the doorway, gripping the folder in my hand. For a moment I almost told her. I almost threw the photos on the coffee table and demanded an explanation. But instead I forced a smile. "Yeah," I said. "Just needed some air." She patted the spot on the couch next to her. "Come sit with me. I was just about to put on that show we like." I hesitated, then sat down, the folder still in my hand. As the opening credits rolled, I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. She looked so at ease, so comfortable. Like nothing was wrong. I realized then that I couldn't just confront her. Not yet. I needed to be ready to have a plan. Because whatever happened next, it was going to change everything. The next day, I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head. The photos, Frank's words, Melissa's casual smile as we sat on the couch. I felt like I was living a double life, pretending everything was normal while the truth ate away at me from the inside. Then, as if the universe wasn't done testing me, Jake showed up at my house. I was in the garage, tinkering with an old toolbox, trying to keep myself busy and distracted. I heard his voice before I saw him. "Yo, Sullivan." He called out, like he hadn't kissed my wife a few nights ago. I turned and saw him walking up the driveway, grinning like nothing was wrong. He had that same cocky swagger I'd known for years, but now it made my skin crawl. "Hey man," I said, forcing a smile. My voice sounded strained even to me. Jake leaned against the garage door, crossing his arms. "Melissa around?" "I was gonna drop off some tools I borrowed." I froze. The audacity of it. Standing in my driveway, asking about my wife, acting like he hadn't been sneaking around behind my back. My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. "She's out," I said flatly. "I'll let her know you stopped by." Jake shrugged, unfazed. "Cool. Oh, by the way, we're still on for the game this weekend, right? You, me, a few beers just like old times." It took everything in me not to snap. I stared at him, wondering how he could stand there and talk to me like this, knowing what he'd done. "I'll let you know," I said through gritted teeth. He gave me a mock salute and turned to leave. "Catch you later, man." As I watched him walk away, I felt a mix of rage and disbelief. The sheer nerve of him, showing up at my house and acting like we were still best friends. It was almost enough to make me forget about Melissa. Almost. When I went back inside, Melissa was standing in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water. "Who was that?" she asked casually. "Jake," I said, watching her closely. "He wanted to drop off some tools." She didn't flinch. She just nodded and sipped her water, completely unfazed. "Oh. Did you tell him I wasn't home?" "Yeah," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. "I told him." I waited for her to slip up, to say something that would hint at the truth. But she didn't. She just smiled and went back to what she was doing, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. That night as we lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Jake's visit. It felt like a slap in the face, like he was testing me to see how much I knew. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how long they'd been pulling this off and how many times I'd unknowingly welcomed Jake into my home, thinking he was my friend. But the worst part? Melissa was lying right next to me, sleeping peacefully like nothing was wrong. I realized then that I couldn't keep this up much longer. Sooner or later something was going to break. 2 days after Jake's little visit, I was hanging on by a thread. Every moment I spent around Melissa felt like a balancing act, pretending not to know while every fiber of my being screamed for answers. That morning, I woke up early and decided to work from home. I told Melissa I needed a quiet day to catch up on some projects. She seemed fine with it. She kissed me on the cheek, grabbed her gym bag and said she'd be back after her yoga class. After she left, I found myself pacing the house. I couldn't focus. I couldn't even bring myself to open my laptop. The photos from Frank, the texts I'd seen, Mrs. Callahan's comments, they all swirled in my head like a storm. I felt like I was suffocating. Then something snapped. I grabbed Melissa's laptop. I hadn't thought much about it before because I figured everything important would be on her phone. But now, I needed to check. The laptop was password protected, but Melissa wasn't exactly creative when it came to passwords. After a couple of tries, I was in. At first, there was nothing. Emails, online shopping, Pinterest boards, just the usual stuff. But then I opened her browser history and my stomach sank. She'd searched for hotels. Not just any hotels, local ones. Small places, the kind you book when you're looking for privacy. One of the tabs was still open, a reservation confirmation for a place called Maplewood Inn. The date was from last week. The same day Jake had been at my house late at night. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, my mind racing. There was no more doubt. No more excuses. This wasn't just in my head. Melissa came home a couple of hours later, cheerful as ever, carrying a smoothie in one hand and her yoga mat in the other. "Hey babe," she called out as she walked into the kitchen. I stayed where I was, sitting at the dining table with the laptop open in front of me. When she saw me, her smile faltered just a little. "Everything okay?" she asked, tilting her head. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at her, trying to decide if I should say something right then or wait. Finally, I stood up and walked past her, grabbing my keys from the counter. "I'm going out," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "Out? Where?" she asked, a hint of confusion in her voice. "Just out," I said, not looking back. I needed air. Space. Anything to stop me from saying or doing something I couldn't take back. I drove aimlessly for about an hour, trying to calm the storm in my head. I kept replaying the confirmation from the Maplewood Inn. Melissa's cheery "Hey babe" kept echoing in my mind, making my blood boil. How could she act so normal? How could she be so comfortable lying to my face? Eventually, I found myself parked at a quiet lot overlooking the river. It was a place I used to go when I needed to clear my head, back when life felt a lot simpler. Sitting there, staring out at the water, I felt the weight of everything crushing down on me. That's when my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, half expecting a text from Melissa, but it wasn't her. It was Frank. "Frank, something new. Thought you'd want to know. Call me when you're free." My heart sank as I dialed his number. "Ryan," Frank said as he picked up. I wasn't expecting this, but I got another lead. "It's about Jake." "What about him?" I asked, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "Turns out Jake's been telling people some interesting stories about you," Frank said, his tone serious. "I spoke to someone who knows him, a guy he works with. Jake's been saying you're controlling, that Melissa's miserable in your marriage, and that he's just trying to help her out." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "What the hell?" "I thought you should know," Frank continued. "It's possible he's setting the stage to make you look like the bad guy if this all comes out. You need to be careful, Ryan. Document everything." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. Jake wasn't just sneaking around with my wife, he was actively trying to tear me down, to paint me as the villain. It was like he was preparing for the fallout, making sure everyone would see him as the hero who rescued Melissa from me. The pieces started to fall into place. All those times Melissa had subtly implied I was too stressed, or that I needed to relax more. The little comments Jake would make about how I worked too much or how Melissa deserved more attention. This wasn't just an affair. It was a betrayal on a level I hadn't even considered. I sat there in the car, staring out at the river, trying to decide what to do next. Every instinct in me wanted to confront them both, to blow it all up. But Frank's warning echoed in my head. I needed to be smart. If Jake was already spinning a narrative about me, I couldn't afford to lose control. I started the car and drove home, my hands still shaking. When I walked in the door, Melissa was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled, but her smile faded when she saw my face. "Are you okay?" she asked, standing up and walking toward me. "Yeah," I said flatly, brushing past her. "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. And as I went to the bedroom and closed the door behind me, I realized one thing for sure. The time for pretending was running out. The next morning, I woke up before Melissa. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee, trying to figure out my next move. Everything felt heavy: the lies, the betrayal, the manipulation Jake was spreading behind my back. I couldn't keep this charade up much longer. When Melissa came downstairs, she was in her usual upbeat mood. She kissed me on the cheek and poured herself a cup of coffee. "You were quiet last night," she said casually. "Just tired," I replied, not looking at her. I watched her as she moved around the kitchen, humming softly. Part of me wanted to ask her right then and there about Jake, about the texts, the hotel reservation. But another part of me wanted to give her one last chance, to see if she'd come clean on her own. So I tested her. "Jake stopped by again yesterday," I said, my voice as neutral as I could make it. Her hand froze mid-stir just for a split second before she recovered. "Oh," she said, glancing over her shoulder at me. "What did he want?" "Just to drop something off," I said, watching her reaction closely. "He also mentioned the game this weekend. Said we should hang out." Melissa nodded, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "That's nice," she said, turning back to the sink. "It's good you two are keeping up with each other. You've been friends for so long." I wanted to laugh. Keeping up with each other? Was that what she called this? I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "You've been spending a lot of time with him lately, haven't you?" That caught her off guard. She turned to face me, her expression carefully neutral. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean," I said, keeping my tone steady. "I've seen the texts, Melissa." Her eyes widened, and for a moment I saw panic flash across her face. But she recovered quickly, crossing her arms and tilting her head. "You went through my phone?" "I didn't need to," I said, pulling the folder from Frank off the chair next to me. I opened it, spreading the photos out on the table. "You're not as good at hiding things as you think." Her face turned pale as she stared at the pictures. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she let out a shaky laugh. This isn't what it looks like, Ryan." I slammed my hand down on the table, making her jump. "Don't you dare say that to me," I said, my voice rising. "You think I'm stupid? That I don't know what's going on?" She took a step back, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's not, Ryan, please just let me explain." "Explain what?" I demanded, standing up and towering over her. "That you've been sneaking around with Jake behind my back? That you've been meeting him at hotels while I'm at work, busting my ass to take care of us?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Melissa?" I shot back. "Because from where I'm standing it looks pretty damn clear." She opened her mouth to speak but closed it again as if she couldn't find the words. For the first time she looked small, cornered. Finally she whispered, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. There it was, the confirmation I'd been dreading. I felt a wave of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak crash over me all at once. "You didn't mean for it to go this far?" I repeated, my voice cold. "You mean you didn't mean to get caught?" Melissa broke down then, covering her face with her hands as she sobbed. "I'm sorry, Ryan. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you." "Hurt me?" I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Melissa, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed me. And for what? Jake? My best friend." She didn't answer. She just stood there, crying as I stared at her, my heart breaking into pieces. I realized then that I couldn't stand to be in the same room as her anymore. I grabbed my keys and walked to the door. "Where are you going?" she asked through her tears. Out, I said without looking back. Don't wait up. I drove aimlessly for hours, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I replayed Melissa's words over and over in my head. I didn't mean for it to go this far. What did that even mean? That it was fine when it started? That it was all fun and games until she got caught? But the worst part wasn't just Melissa, it was Jake. The guy I'd trusted with everything. The guy who stood by my side through thick and thin, who'd been at my wedding, making toasts about how lucky I was to have her. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I didn't even realize where I was driving until I found myself pulling up outside Jake's apartment. His truck was parked out front and the lights were on. Without thinking, I got out of the car and marched to his door. I banged on it hard enough to rattle the frame. A few seconds later, Jake opened the door wearing sweats and a t-shirt, his hair messy like he'd just woken up. "Ryan," he said, looking genuinely surprised. "What's up, man?" I didn't say anything. I just shoved him hard enough to make him stumble back into the apartment. "Whoa. What the hell, dude?" he shouted, throwing up his hands. "You know exactly what the hell, Jake," I snapped, slamming the door shut behind me. "I know. About you and Melissa." His face changed instantly. The fake confusion vanished, replaced by something colder. He didn't even try to deny it. "Ryan, listen." "No, you listen," I cut him off, stepping closer. "You were supposed to be my friend. My brother. How could you do this to me?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's not what you think." I let out a bitter laugh. "Not what I think. So you didn't sneak around with my wife? You didn't meet her at hotels or kiss her in parking lots?" Jake's jaw tightened and he looked away. "It's complicated, man. Complicated." I repeated, my voice rising. "What's complicated about betraying someone who's had your back for years? Tell me, Jake, did you even feel guilty or did you think I was too stupid to figure it out?" He stepped forward, trying to play the calm one, which only made me angrier. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? It happened. I didn't plan for it. I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to hurt me?" I shouted. "Jake, you didn't just hurt me, you ripped my life apart. You ruined my marriage, my trust, my everything. And for what? For Melissa. Was it worth it?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Finally he said, "Ryan, I care about her." Those words felt like a knife to the chest. I stepped back, shaking my head in disbelief. "You care about her? Is that supposed to make this better? You care about her, so it's okay to stab me in the back?" "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," he said, his voice rising. "You don't understand what it was like. She was miserable, Ryan. She told me everything, how you were too focused on work, how she felt ignored." "Shut up," I roared, my anger boiling over. "You don't get to stand here and blame me for your choices. If she had a problem, she could have come to me, not you." Jake opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "You know what? I don't care. I don't care why you did it or how you justify it. You're a liar, Jake. A selfish, backstabbing coward." I turned to leave, but before I reached the door I stopped. "And by the way, everyone's going to know what kind of person you are. You think I'm going to keep this quiet? Think again." I slammed the door behind me, not waiting for a response. As I walked back to my car, I felt the anger giving way to something deeper. Grief. I'd lost not just a wife but a best friend. Someone I thought I could trust more than anyone. And now I had to figure out what came next. After confronting Jake, I drove home feeling numb. The anger that had carried me through the day was fading, replaced by an emptiness that I didn't know how to fill. When I got home, Melissa was sitting on the couch, clutching her phone tightly. She looked up as I walked in, her face red and blotchy like she'd been crying. "Where were you?" she asked softly. "Out," I said, brushing past her. I was about to head straight to the bedroom when her voice stopped me. "Did you talk to him?" I turned slowly to face her. She looked small, nervous. "You mean Jake?" I asked, my voice cold. She nodded, biting her lip. "What did he say?" "What do you think he said, Melissa?" I snapped. He admitted it. He didn't even try to deny it. Her eyes filled with tears again, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I'm so sorry, Ryan. I didn't want this to happen. Stop saying that, I said, my voice rising. You didn't want it to happen? You made choices, Melissa. Over and over again. You didn't accidentally end up in his arms or in a hotel with him. She didn't say anything, just sobbed quietly into her hands. I wanted to feel bad for her, but all I could feel was anger and disappointment. Why? I asked after a long silence. Why him? Why my best friend? She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I don't know, she whispered. I was lonely. You were always so busy with work, and Jake, he was there. He listened. He made me feel wanted. Her words felt like another knife to the chest. I worked to give us a good life, Melissa. To make sure we had everything we needed. And this is how you repay me. I know I messed up, she said, her voice breaking. I know I hurt you and I hate myself for it. But I never stopped loving you, Ryan. I swear. I laughed bitterly. You've got a funny way of showing it. I didn't wait for her to respond. I went to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. As I sat on the edge of the bed trying to calm down, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Frank. Frank, just got something else. You'll want to see this. Call me. I dialed him immediately. What is it? I asked, my voice tense. Frank sighed on the other end. Ryan, I did some more digging. It's worse than we thought. What do you mean? I checked into Jake's finances, he said. He's been in deep trouble for a while now. Gambling debts, overdue bills, the works. And get this, there's a new account linked to Melissa. A joint account. Looks like she's been funneling money to him. My heart stopped. What? I don't know how much yet, Frank continued, but it's not pocket change. This goes deeper than just an affair. I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me. Not only had Melissa betrayed me emotionally, but now I was finding out she'd been taking money from our household, from my hard-earned income, to help Jake. I hung up without saying anything and stared at the wall, my hands trembling. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was theft. This was manipulation. And as much as it hurt, I realized then that I couldn't trust Melissa at all, not with my heart, not with my money, not with anything. When I went back into the living room, Melissa was still sitting there, looking lost and broken. We need to talk, I said, my voice ice cold. Her head shot up, fear flashing across her face. What is it? I know about the money, I said simply. Her face went pale, and for the first time she didn't have a quick answer. Melissa stared at me, her face pale as a sheet. What money? She asked, her voice trembling. Don't, I said, cutting her off. Don't play dumb, Melissa. I know about the joint account. I know you've been giving Jake money. How long has this been going on? Her eyes widened in panic and she shook her head. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. I snapped, my voice echoing through the room. Because right now it looks like you've been lying to me, cheating on me, and stealing from me to fund whatever mess Jake has gotten himself into. Tears welled up in her eyes again, and for a moment I thought she might deny it. But then her shoulders slumped and she let out a shaky breath. It started a few months ago, she admitted quietly. Jake, he was in trouble. He came to me and said he needed help. He promised it would just be a loan, that he'd pay it back. And you thought it was a good idea to funnel money to him without telling me? I said, disbelief laced through my words. I didn't think you'd understand. She cried. You always said Jake was irresponsible, that he needed to grow up. I thought if I told you, you'd cut him off completely. You're damn right I would've, I said, my voice cold. You had no right to make that decision without me. That's our money, Melissa. Money I earned while you were busy. What? Running around behind my back with him. She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. It wasn't like that at first, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was just helping him. But then, things got complicated. Complicated, I repeated bitterly. You mean when you started sleeping with him? She didn't answer, and her silence said more than words ever could. How much? I demanded, my voice hard. How much money did you give him? I don't know, she admitted, wiping her eyes. A few thousand, maybe more. I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. A few thousand? Melissa, do you even hear yourself? That's not just a little mistake, that's a betrayal on every level. I was trying to help him, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand. I thought I could fix it before you found out. Fix it? I said, shaking my head. Melissa, you didn't just break my trust, you shattered it. How am I supposed to believe a word you say after this? She broke down completely then, sobbing into her hands. I know I messed up, Ryan. I know I ruined everything. But I never stopped loving you. I swear. Loving me? I said, my voice thick with anger and disbelief. If this is how you treat someone you love, I'd hate to see what you do to someone you don't care about. I turned away from her, my chest heaving. I couldn't look at her anymore. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I thought I could trust, was gone. I need some space, I said finally. Don't follow me. I grabbed my jacket and left, slamming the door behind me. I drove around aimlessly for hours that night. The rage I felt was starting to morph into something heavier, something that settled deep in my chest and refused to let go. It was grief. I wasn't just mourning my marriage, I was mourning the person I thought Melissa was, the life I thought we had. By the time I got back home, it was past midnight. The house was dark, except for the faint glow of the living room lamp. I stepped inside, half hoping Melissa would be gone, but she wasn't. She was sitting on the couch, curled up under a blanket, staring blankly at the floor. She didn't say anything when I walked in, and I didn't say anything to her. I went straight to the guest room and shut the door behind me. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Melissa moving around in the kitchen. For a split second, everything felt normal. But then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and I felt a familiar wave of anger and hurt wash over me. When I stepped out of the guest room, she looked up from her coffee. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she looked like she hadn't slept at all. Ryan, she said softly, standing up. Can we talk? I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. What could you possibly say that I haven't already heard? I know you hate me right now, she said, her voice trembling. And I don't blame you. But I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I was lost, and Jake, he took advantage of that. I let out a bitter laugh. Don't you dare pin this on him, Melissa. He didn't force you to do anything. You made a choice. Over and over again. Her lip quivered, but she nodded. You're right. I did. And I hate myself for it. I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. Do you even realize what you've done? You didn't just cheat on me, you lied, you stole from me, and you betrayed everything we built together. How do you come back from that? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to the counter and picked up a stack of papers. She held them out to me with shaking hands. What's this? I asked, not moving to take them. I canceled the joint account, she said quietly. And I printed out all the statements. I want you to see everything. I don't want to hide anything from you anymore. Reluctantly, I took the papers and flipped through them. Each page detailed the transfers she'd made to Jake, starting small but growing larger as time went on. By the last page, the total was nearly $10,000. 10 grand. I said, my voice rising. Melissa, are you kidding me? I know, she said, tears streaming down her face. I know it was wrong, Ryan. I don't know how to fix this. I stared at her, my mind racing. Every instinct in me wanted to scream, to throw the papers in her face and tell her to get out of my life. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I don't think you can fix this, I said finally, my voice low. I think you broke something that can't be put back together. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her to sit with the weight of her choices. For the next few days, the house was suffocating. Melissa tiptoed around, trying to talk to me every chance she got, but I kept my distance. I didn't have the energy to hear another apology or explanation. I started staying out later, spending my evenings at a diner across town or sitting in my car at the park. I couldn't bear to be at home, surrounded by the memories of a life that now felt like a lie. Then one night as I was nursing a cup of coffee at the diner, Frank called again. "Ryan," he said, his voice serious. "I've got one last piece of information for you." I wasn't going to dig further, but something felt off. My stomach tightened. "What now?" "I looked deeper into Jake's debts," he said. "Turns out, the money Melissa gave him didn't go to paying them off. He's been gambling it away. Casinos, online poker, you name it. And he's still in deep." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. "So she gave him money for nothing?" "Pretty much," Frank said. "And there's more. I found out Jake's been talking to a lawyer." "A lawyer?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. "For what?" "Melissa," Frank said. "Looks like he's been coaching her. If she files for divorce, he's trying to make sure she gets half of everything." My blood ran cold. "You're saying he's pushing her to divorce me?" "Exactly," Frank said. "The timing lines up. He's broke, and he sees her as his meal ticket. If she takes half of your assets, Jake gets his hands on it too. This whole thing isn't just an affair, Ryan, it's a setup." I hung up without saying much. My mind was racing and my chest felt like it was going to explode. Jake hadn't just betrayed me as a friend. He was using Melissa to dismantle my life piece by piece. When I got home that night, Melissa was waiting for me in the living room. She stood up as soon as I walked in. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm. "For once, I agree," I said, dropping my keys on the table. "But first, let me ask you something. Were you planning to divorce me?" Her face went pale. "What? No, of course not." "Don't lie to me, Melissa," I said, my voice rising. "I know about Jake's little plan. I know he's been coaching you, telling you what to do so he can get his hands on my money." She stumbled back, shaking her head. "Ryan, I swear I didn't know about that. He mentioned things, but I never agreed to it." I laughed bitterly. "You never agreed to it? So what, you were just going to keep playing both sides until you figured out what benefited you most?" "No." She cried, tears streaming down her face again. "I was trying to figure out how to fix this. I wasn't going to leave you." "Well, that makes one of us," I said coldly. Her breath hitched. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying it's over, Melissa," I said, my voice steady. "I'm done. I've had enough of the lies, the betrayal, the manipulation. I'm filing for divorce." Her legs seemed to give out, and she sank onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, Ryan. Don't do this. I'll do anything to make it right. I'll cut Jake out of my life. I'll go to therapy. I'll—" "It's too late," I said, cutting her off. "You made your choices. And now, I'm making mine." I turned and walked to the bedroom, grabbing a bag and packing a few essentials. I couldn't stay in that house another second. As I walked out the door, Melissa's voice called after me, broken and desperate. "Ryan, please don't leave." But I didn't look back. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. After leaving the house that night, I stayed with a friend from work, Mike, who didn't ask too many questions but gave me the space I needed. Melissa called and texted constantly. Long, rambling messages about how sorry she was, how she still loved me, how she'd do anything to fix things. At first, I ignored her. But after a few days, I sent her one final text. "Me, Melissa, we're done. Stop calling me. I've already contacted a lawyer. Any communication going forward will be through them." After that, I blocked her number. Filing for divorce felt surreal. I sat in the lawyer's office, staring at the paperwork in front of me, barely hearing the words coming out of her mouth. She was professional, sympathetic, and reassuring, but nothing made it easier. I was signing away a future I'd spent years building. When my lawyer asked if I wanted to pursue a claim for the money Melissa had taken, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to go after her and Jake, to make them pay for what they'd done. But in the end, I decided against it. I didn't want to drag this out any longer than I had to. I wanted to move on. Melissa didn't take the divorce well. Through my lawyer, I heard about her repeated attempts to contact me, her insistence that she wanted to reconcile. I also heard that she'd finally cut ties with Jake. Apparently, he'd tried to push her to fight for more money in the divorce, and when she refused, he ghosted her. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. It just made me feel empty. The real closure came when Jake showed up at my workplace. I was leaving the office late one night when I saw him leaning against my car, looking like the cocky jerk he always was. "What do you want, Jake?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I wanted to talk," he said, holding up his hands like he was surrendering. "I screwed up, man. I know that. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." "Sorry," I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You think sorry fixes this?" He shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't let him speak. "You didn't just ruin my marriage, Jake. You ruined everything. You betrayed me in the worst possible way, and for what? Some money? A fling with Melissa?" I shook my head, disgusted. "I don't care why you did it. I don't care what excuses you have. You're dead to me." He looked like he wanted to argue, but he must have seen something in my expression because he just nodded and walked away. That was the last time I saw him. It's been a couple of months now. The divorce is almost finalized, and I've started to find my footing again. I moved into a small apartment, nothing fancy, but it feels like mine. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe. Some days are harder than others. There are moments when the memories creep in, Melissa's laugh, Jake's stupid jokes, the life I thought I had. But those moments are becoming fewer and farther between. I've started going to the gym, picking up hobbies I'd put on the back burner, and reconnecting with old friends. I'm learning to trust myself again, to focus on what I want instead of what I lost. And as for Melissa and Jake, I don't think about them much anymore. They made their choices and now they have to live with them. As painful as this whole experience has been, it's taught me something important. I deserve better. I deserve people who are honest, loyal, and genuine. And I won't settle for anything less ever again. This isn't the ending I wanted, but maybe it's the one I needed.